Clara May Harrison's hands were blue, not cold. Blue. She'd stopped shivering an hour ago, which meant she was dying. The man who'd paid for her train ticket had taken one look, called her damaged goods, and walked away. Now 3 drunks circled closer, boots crunching through snow, and she couldn't even scream. Her throat had frozen shut. When the tallest one reached for her, a voice cut through the dark like a rifle shot. "Step back." Clara's eyes rolled toward the sound. A man. A child. And for the first time in her 22 years, she prayed someone would actually stay. Before we begin, if stories of second chances and frontier courage speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button. Stay with us until the end. You won't believe how this unfolds. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story can travel. Wyoming Territory. Winter 1883. The train platform was little more than frozen planks and a tin roof that rattled in the wind. Clara May Harrison sat on a bench with her hands tucked inside her coat sleeves, her breath coming out in short white clouds. The hem of her dress was stiff with ice where she'd fallen earlier trying to step down from the train car. Her satchel sat beside her, small and pathetic. Everything she owned fit inside it. She'd been sitting there for 2 hours. The man who was supposed to meet her, a Mr. Jack Morrison rancher, widower Presbyterian, had sent a letter 6 weeks ago. The letter had been polite, professional. It said he needed a wife to help with the house and provide companionship. It said nothing about love, which Clara had appreciated. Love was a risk she couldn't afford. But when Jack Morrison stepped off the afternoon train, took one long look at her and said, "You're not what I ordered," Clara realized she'd been a fool to hope for anything else. "I sent a photograph," she'd said quietly. That photograph lied. Her face had burned. She'd wanted to say the photograph was 4 years old, before her stepfather had blackened her eye so badly it never sat quite right again. She'd wanted to say she'd lost weight, because she'd been saving every penny for the ticket west. But she said nothing, because women like her didn't get to defend themselves. Jack Morrison had adjusted his hat, glanced once more at her thin frame and crooked face, and said, "I'll wire the agency for a refund." Then he'd walked away. And Clara had stayed on that bench because where else was there to go? Now the sky was dark. The station master had locked up an hour ago, and the 3 men across the platform were getting braver. "She ain't got nowhere to go," one of them said loud enough for her to hear. "Maybe she's waiting for us." Another laughed. Clara kept her eyes on the ground. She'd learned young that looking at men like that only made things worse. The tallest one stood. His boots were loud against the frozen wood. Clara's chest tightened. She thought about running, but her legs wouldn't move. Fear had a way of pinning you down. "You lost, girl." She didn't answer. "I'm talking to you." He was close enough now that she could smell the whiskey. Her hands curled into fists inside her sleeves, but she knew it wouldn't matter. She'd fought before. She always lost. The man reached out. "Step back." The voice came from behind him, low and sharp. The drunk froze. Slowly he turned. A man stood just beyond the lamplight, tall and broad-shouldered snow clinging to the brim of his hat. In his arms, bundled in a wool coat too big for her, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 8. Her eyes were dark and serious, and she watched everything without making a sound. "We got no trouble with you, Cooper," the drunk said, but he took a step back. "Then keep it that way." The other 2 men stood grumbling, but they didn't approach. The tall man, Cooper, ignored them. He walked straight to Clara, his boots steady and sure. "You the bride Jack Morrison left here?" Clara nodded. Her voice wouldn't work. Cooper crouched down so they were eye level. Up close she could see the lines around his eyes, the silver starting at his temples. He wasn't young, but he wasn't old either, just worn. "You got people?" She shook her head. "Money." Another shake. He looked at her for a long moment, and Clara braced herself for the same disgust she'd seen in Jack Morrison's face. But it didn't come. Instead, Cooper straightened, shifted the child in his arms, and shrugged out of his heavy coat. He draped it over Clara's shoulders. "Come on." "Where?" The word came out cracked and small. "My place. You'll freeze if you stay here." "I can't." "You can. You will." He said it like there was no other option, and maybe there wasn't. Clara stood on shaking legs. The coat was warm, still holding his heat. The little girl in his arms stared at her unblinking. "What's your name?" Clara whispered. The girl didn't answer. She just tucked her face into Cooper's shoulder. "She don't talk much," Cooper said. "Name's Ruby. She's my niece." He led Clara to a wagon hitched just beyond the platform. Two sturdy horses stamped their feet in the cold, their breath rising in thick clouds. Cooper lifted Ruby into the back seat, then held out a hand to Clara. She hesitated, staring at his calloused palm. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said quietly. Clara took his hand. His grip was firm, steady. He helped her into the wagon, wrapped a wool blanket around her legs, and climbed up front. The reins snapped, and the wagon lurched forward into the dark. They rode in silence for a long time. The wind howled across the open prairie, carrying snow in sideways sheets. Clara couldn't see anything beyond the glow of the wagon's lantern. She held the blanket tight and tried not to think about what she was doing climbing into a stranger's wagon in the middle of nowhere. But what choice did she have? After a while, Ruby shifted in her seat. She crawled forward closer to Clara and stared at her with those serious dark eyes. "You're cold," the girl said. It was the first time she'd spoken. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. Clara nodded. "A little." Ruby reached into her coat and pulled out a small cloth doll, worn and faded. She held it out. "She keeps me warm," Ruby said. Clara's throat tightened. She took the doll gently, and Ruby climbed into her lap, without asking, curling up like a cat. Clara wrapped her arms around the child, and for the first time in hours, she felt something other than cold. Cooper glanced back once, his expression unreadable, then turned his eyes back to the road. The cabin appeared suddenly a dark shape against the white hills. Smoke rose from the chimney and a single lantern glowed in the window. Cooper pulled the wagon up to the porch and climbed down. He lifted Ruby first, then turned to help Clara. Inside the cabin was small, but clean. A wood stove burned in the corner, filling the room with blessed heat. There was a table, 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the fire. A narrow hallway led to what Clara assumed were bedrooms. "Sit," Cooper said, nodding toward the rocker. Clara sat. Ruby climbed into her lap again, still holding her doll. Cooper moved around the cabin with quiet efficiency. He stoked the fire, filled a kettle with water, set it on the stove. He didn't speak, and Clara didn't either. She just held Ruby and let the warmth seep into her bones. When the water was hot, Cooper poured it into a chipped mug and handed it to her. "Drink." Clara wrapped her blue fingers around the mug. The heat hurt, but she didn't let go. Cooper pulled out the other chair and sat across from her. He took off his hat, set it on the table. His hair was dark blonde, longer than was fashionable. He studied her the way a man studies a horse he's thinking of buying. "What's your name?" "Clara. Clara May Harrison." "Where you from?" "Pennsylvania. Coal country." "Family." Clara hesitated. "My mother remarried. Her husband didn't want me around." That was the polite version. The truth was uglier. Cooper nodded slowly. "Jack Morrison's a fool." Clara blinked. "What?" "He was looking for a showpiece. Someone to trot out at church socials. You ain't that." "No," Clara said quietly. "I'm not." "Good. Showpieces don't last out here." He leaned back in his chair. "I got a proposition." Clara's stomach tightened. She knew what men meant when they said that. Cooper must have seen it in her face, because he held up a hand. "Not that. I need help with the house and with Ruby. I'll pay you a fair wage, give you room and board. You stay through the winter, and come spring, I'll stake you enough to get wherever you want to go. No strings." Clara stared at him. "Why?" "Because you need help and I need help. Seems fair?" "You don't know me." I know you got nowhere else to go. I know you're scared, but you ain't stupid because you didn't run off into the snow. And I know Ruby likes you, which is more than I can say for most folks." He glanced at the child who had fallen asleep in Clara's lap. "She lost her mama a year ago. My sister. Her daddy didn't want her, so I took her in. She ain't spoke more than 10 words to anyone since." Clara looked down at Ruby's peaceful face. "She spoke to me. I noticed." "Mr. Cooper." "Nate. Just Nate." "Nate." Clara swallowed hard. "I don't know how to be what you need." "Neither do I. We'll figure it out." He picked up his hat. "There's a spare room down the hall. It's small, but it's warm. Ruby sleeps in the room next to it. I'm across the hall. You need anything, you holler." Clara nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Nate crossed to her, gently lifted Ruby from her lap, and carried the sleeping child down the hallway. Clara heard a door open and close, then his boots on the wooden floor. He reappeared a moment later. "Get some sleep," he said. "We'll talk more in the morning." He disappeared into his own room and shut the door. Clara sat alone by the fire for a long time, holding the empty mug. She didn't cry. She'd learned young that crying didn't fix anything. But something in her chest, something that had been clenched tight for years, loosened just a little. She stood, walked down the hallway, and found the spare room. It was barely bigger than a closet, with a narrow bed and a single window. But the quilt was thick and the walls didn't shake in the wind. Clara lay down fully clothed and pulled the quilt to her chin. Through the thin walls, she could hear Nate moving around in his room, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of fabric. Then silence. She closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she slept without nightmares. Morning came cold and gray. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, and for a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then it came back in pieces, the train platform, the drunk men Nate Cooper and his silent niece. She sat up slowly, every muscle stiff. Her dress was wrinkled and still damp at the hem. She finger-combed her hair, splashed icy water on her face from the basin on the dresser, and stepped into the hallway. The cabin was quiet. Nate stood at the stove flipping bacon in a cast-iron skillet. Ruby sat at the table legs swinging, eating toast with jam. She looked up when Clara entered and offered a small, shy smile. "Morning," Nate said without turning around. "Morning." Clara's voice was rusty. "Coffee's on the table. Bacon'll be done in a minute." Clara poured herself a cup and sat across from Ruby. The girl watched her with those serious eyes, then pushed the jar of jam across the table. "It's strawberry," Ruby said. "It's good." "Thank you." Clara spread a little on a piece of toast and took a bite. It was good. Simple, but good. Nate brought the bacon over and sat down. For a few minutes they ate in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was just quiet the way mornings should be. Finally, Nate set down his fork. "I got chores. Horses need feedin', firewood needs choppin'. You're welcome to rest, or you can help Ruby with her lessons. She's learnin' her letters." "I can help," Clara said quickly. "I'm good with letters. Numbers, too." Nate raised an eyebrow. "You read?" "Yes, sir. My mother taught me before she remarried." Something shifted in his expression, but he didn't say anything. He just nodded. "Good. Ruby needs it. I ain't much for book learnin'." He stood, pulled on his coat, and headed for the door. Before he stepped out, he paused. "Clara." She looked up. "You don't have to call me sir. I work for a livin' same as you." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. Ruby slid out of her chair and took Clara's hand. Her palm was small and warm. "Come on," she said. "I'll show you the letters." Clara let herself be led to a small shelf in the corner where a few battered books sat beside a slate and a piece of chalk. Ruby pulled down a primer and opened it to a page full of crooked letters. "I know A through F," Ruby said proudly, "but G is hard." Clara knelt beside her. "Let's try it together." They spent the morning on the floor by the fire, Ruby tracing letters on the slate, while Clara sounded out words. The child was bright, quicker than she let on. She just needed patience, encouragement. At noon, Nate came back inside dusting snow off his shoulders. He paused when he saw them. Ruby's head bent close to Clara's, both of them laughing over a badly drawn cat. "She drew a dog," Ruby giggled. "That's a cat," Clara insisted. "It's got a long nose. Cats have noses." Nate's mouth twitched almost a smile. "Lunch ready." Clara stood quickly. "I can make something." "You don't have to." "I want to." She brushed past him to the stove, found a pot, started slicing potatoes. She worked quickly, efficiently, the way she'd learned working in her stepfather's house. Nate watched her for a moment, then sat down beside Ruby. "Show me your letters." Ruby held up the slate. Nate studied it, nodded. "That's good work, Rubes." The child beamed. By the time Clara had stew simmering on the stove, it was snowing again. Fat flakes drifted past the window, piling up on the sill. Nate stood, looked out, and frowned. "Storm's coming in heavy. I need to check on the fence line before it gets worse." He glanced at Clara. "You'll be all right here." "Yes." "Keep the fire going. Don't open the door for anyone but me." Clara's stomach tightened. "Are you expecting someone?" Nate hesitated. "No. But folks talk. Word'll get around that you're here. Some might come by to satisfy their curiosity." "You mean they'll come to judge me?" He didn't deny it. "Let 'em talk. You're under my roof. That means something out here." He pulled on his coat, tugged his hat low, and stepped out into the snow. Ruby moved to the window and pressed her nose against the glass, watching him go. Clara joined her, and together they stood in silence until Nate disappeared into the white. "Is he coming back?" Ruby asked quietly. "Yes," Clara said, though her chest felt tight. "He's coming back." But as the snow fell harder and the wind began to howl, she wondered if she was telling the truth. The wind screamed against the cabin walls. Clara stood at the window watching the snow erase the world. Nate had been gone for 2 hours, maybe 3. She'd lost track. Ruby tugged on her sleeve. "Is Papa Nate okay?" Clara forced a smile. "He knows these hills. He'll be fine." But her hands were shaking when she stirred the stew. Another hour passed. The fire needed more wood. Clara bundled Ruby in a quilt and told her to stay put, then stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit her like a fist. The woodpile was only 10 feet away, but the snow was already knee-deep. She waded through it, grabbed an armful of logs, and turned back. That's when she saw him. A figure stumbling through the white, hunched against the wind. Clara's heart lurched. She dropped the wood and ran her boots, sinking with every step. "Nate!" He looked up. His face was gray, his lips blue. Blood darkened his left sleeve. Clara grabbed his arm and pulled it over her shoulders. He was heavy, all muscle and bone, but she dragged him forward. 1 step. 2. The porch stairs seemed impossible, but she got him up, got him inside, slammed the door against the wind. Ruby screamed. "It's okay," Clara gasped. "He's okay." But he wasn't. Nate collapsed onto the chair, breathing hard. His coat was torn at the shoulder, and when Clara peeled it back, she saw the gash. Deep, ragged, barbed wire maybe. "Ruby, get me clean rags, the white ones in the chest." The child ran. Clara's hands moved fast, unbuttoning Nate's shirt, pulling it away from the wound. He hissed in pain. "Sorry," she whispered. "I've had worse." His voice was rough but steady. Ruby came back with the rags. Clara folded one, pressed it hard against the wound. Blood soaked through immediately. She pressed harder. "You need a doctor." "Can't get one in this storm." "Then I'll do it." Nate's eyes met hers. "You know how I watched my grandmother stitch up my uncle after a mine collapse. I was 12. Clara's jaw tightened. "I can do it." She sent Ruby for the sewing kit, for whiskey, for more rags. The child moved like a shadow, quick and silent. Clara boiled water, threaded a needle with steady hands, even though her heart was hammering. "This is gonna hurt," she said. Nate nodded. He took a long pull from the whiskey bottle, then gripped the edge of the table. Clara poured whiskey over the wound. Nate's whole body went rigid, but he didn't make a sound. She threaded the needle through his skin, pulled it tight. 1 stitch, 2, 3. Her hands didn't shake. She couldn't afford to let them. Ruby stood in the corner, clutching her doll, watching everything. "Talk to me," Nate said through gritted teeth. Clara blinked. "About what?" "Anything. Just talk." So she did. She told him about Pennsylvania, about the mines that ate men alive, about her grandmother, who knew every herb that grew in the hills. She told him about the first time she'd sewn up a wound, how her hands had shaken so bad she'd had to start over twice. "They don't shake now," Nate said. "No." Clara tied off the last stitch. "They don't." She wrapped the wound in clean cloth, tied it tight. Nate sagged back in the chair, his face pale, but his eyes clear. "Thank you." Clara nodded. She couldn't speak. The fear was catching up to her now, making her chest tight. Ruby crept forward and climbed into Nate's lap, careful of his shoulder. She pressed her face against his chest. "You scared me," she whispered. "I'm sorry, Rubes." He wrapped his good arm around her. "I'm okay now." Clara turned away, busied herself cleaning up the blood. Her hands were shaking now that it was over. She heard Nate's voice behind her, low and gentle, talking to Ruby. Heard the child's soft responses. When she turned back, Ruby was asleep in his arms. "I'll take her to bed," Clara said quietly. Nate nodded. He stood slowly wincing and followed Clara down the hall. She pulled back Ruby's quilt, and Nate laid the child down gently. Ruby didn't wake. Clara tucked the blanket around her, smoothed her hair. In the hallway, Nate leaned against the wall. He was breathing harder than he should be. "You need to rest," Clara said. "I need to check the horses first." "The horses are fine. You're not." "Clara, sit down before you fall down." He stared at her for a moment, then laughed. It was a short, surprised sound. "Yes, ma'am." She helped him to his room, helped him out of his boots. He sat on the edge of the bed, and Clara knelt to check the bandage. Blood had seeped through, but not much. "It'll hold," she said. "But you need to keep still tonight." "I will." He caught her wrist gently. "You did good today." Clara looked up. His face was close, his eyes tired but warm. Something flickered in her chest, unfamiliar and terrifying. She pulled away. "Get some sleep." She closed his door and leaned against it, breathing hard. Her hands were shaking again. She pressed them flat against her thighs until they stopped. The storm raged all night. Clara didn't sleep. She kept the fire going, checked on Ruby twice, stood outside Nate's door 3 times without knocking. At dawn, the wind finally died. Clara made coffee, started breakfast. When Nate appeared in the doorway, dressed and moving carefully, she wanted to yell at him for being up. But she just poured him a cup and set it on the table. "How's the shoulder?" "Sore. But I'll live thanks to you." Ruby stumbled out of her room, rubbing her eyes. She saw Nate and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. He winced, but didn't push her away. "I'm okay, Rubes. Promise." They ate breakfast in quiet. Outside, the world was white and still. Clara washed the dishes while Nate pulled on his coat. "Where are you going?" "Horses still need feedin'. Fence still needs fixin'." "Not with that shoulder." "I've got another one that works just fine." Clara dried her hands. "Then I'm coming with you." Nate frowned. "You don't have to." "You can't lift anything heavy." "I can." She pulled on the coat he'd given her that first night. It still smelled like him, like leather and wood smoke. "Besides, I need to learn how things work around here if I'm staying through winter." Something shifted in his expression. "You're staying?" Clara hadn't realized she'd decided until she said it out loud. "If the offer's still good." "It is." Ruby clapped her hands. "She's staying." Nate's mouth twitched. Looks like it. They worked side by side all morning. Clara hauled water while Nate fed the horses. She learned their names Buck Sam Daisy and a mean-tempered mare called Duchess who tried to bite her twice. Nate showed her how to check their hooves, how to spread the hay so they didn't fight over it. "You're a quick learner," he said. "I have to be." He looked at her for a long moment. "Why'd you really come west?" "Clara." She kept her eyes on the horse. "I told you, my stepfather. That's part of it, but there's more." Clara's hand stilled. She thought about lying, but what was the point? He'd see through it. "He hit my mother," she said quietly. "For years. She never fought back. Never left. One night he came after me instead and I fought. Broke his nose with a fire poker." She swallowed hard. "He said he'd have me arrested. Said no one would believe me. So I ran." Nate didn't speak. He just moved closer, rested his hand briefly on her shoulder. The weight was warm solid. "He was wrong," Nate said. "I believe you." Clara's throat tightened. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They worked until noon, then trudged back to the cabin. Ruby had the table set, the stew reheated. She'd even drawn a picture 3 stick figures holding hands. "That's us," Ruby announced. Clara stared at the drawing. Her chest ached. That afternoon, a knock came at the door. Nate tensed. He glanced at Clara, then crossed to the window. "It's Maggie Wilson, from town." He opened the door. A woman stood on the porch, 50-something, sturdy as an oak tree. She wore a man's coat and carried a covered basket. "Nate Cooper, you let a girl freeze at the station and didn't tell anyone?" "Word travels fast," Nate said dryly. "It's a small town. Move aside. I want to meet her." Maggie swept past him, her sharp eyes landing on Clara. She looked her up and down, and Clara braced herself for judgment. Instead, Maggie smiled. "You're the one who stitched him up last night." Clara blinked. "How did you—" "Doc Rigsby came by my place this morning. Said Nate should be laid up for a week with that wound, but he saw him out feeding horses at dawn. Only way that happens is if someone patched him good." Maggie set the basket on the table. "Brought you some supplies. Flour, sugar, real coffee. Nate drinks that weak swill that tastes like dirt." "It's not that bad," Nate muttered. "It's terrible." Maggie turned back to Clara. "You got a name?" "Clara. Clara May Harrison." "Well, Clara May Harrison, you picked a hard man to work for. He don't talk much and he's stubborn as a mule. But he's decent. More decent than most." She lowered her voice. "You in trouble?" Clara's breath caught. "What? Are you running from something? Someone—" Maggie's eyes were kind but sharp. "I ain't judging. Half the women in this territory are running from something. Just need to know if trouble's gonna follow you here." Clara glanced at Nate. He stood by the door, his expression unreadable. "My stepfather," Clara said quietly. "But he doesn't know where I went. I made sure of it." Maggie nodded. "Good. Then you'll do fine." She pulled a wrapped bundle from the basket. "This is for Ruby. Hair ribbons. Every girl needs something pretty." Ruby took the ribbons with wide eyes. "Thank you, Miss Maggie." "You're welcome, darlin'." Maggie patted her head, then headed for the door. She paused beside Nate. "Town's gonna talk. You know that. Let 'em. Mrs. Howell's already stirring the pot, saying Clara's a loose woman, that you're harboring sin under your roof." Nate's jaw tightened. "Martha Howell wouldn't know sin if it bit her." "Maybe not. But she's got the preacher's ear." Maggie glanced back at Clara. "You'll have to come to town eventually. Face 'em down. Show 'em you're respectable." "I'm not sure I am," Clara said quietly. Maggie laughed sharp and sudden. "Respectability's overrated. Just be strong. That's what matters out here." She tipped her hat to Nate. "Take care of that shoulder. And take care of her. She's braver than she looks." Then she was gone, the door closing behind her with a soft thud. Nate turned to Clara. "You don't have to go to town if you don't want to. I'll have to eventually. Might as well get it over with." Not yet. Wait till the talk dies down. It won't die down. You know that. Clara straightened her shoulders. I've been judged before. I'll survive it again. Nate studied her, and something like respect flickered in his eyes. All right, Sunday. We'll go to church. Show 'em you're here to stay. Clara's stomach twisted, but she nodded. Sunday. That night, after Ruby was in bed, Clara sat by the fire mending one of Nate's shirts. He sat across from her, oiling a bridle, the leather creaking softly in his hands. You don't have to do that, he said. I know. Clara bit off the thread, tied it. But it needed doing. He was quiet for a while. Then, my wife died 3 years ago. Childbirth. The baby didn't make it either. Clara's hands stilled. I'm sorry. Her name was Sarah. She was kind, patient, everything I'm not. He set the bridle aside. Ruby's my sister's girl. Emma died of fever last winter. Ruby's father didn't want her, said she reminded him too much of his dead wife. So I took her. You didn't have to. Yeah, I did. Nate looked at her. She's blood. That matters. Clara thought of her own mother, who'd chosen a violent man over her daughter. Not always. No, Nate agreed. Not always. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Clara felt something shifting, some wall crumbling. She didn't know if that was good or dangerous. Why'd you really bring me here? She asked quietly. You could have sent me to Maggie's boarding house. Could have given me money for a train ticket east. Nate leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Because Ruby looked at you and smiled. She ain't smiled at anyone since her mama died. And because... He stopped, shook his head. Because what? Because you were dying on that bench and I couldn't walk away. His voice was rough. I tried. Got halfway down the street and turned around. Couldn't do it. Clara's chest tightened. You don't know me. I know enough. He stood, picked up the bridle. Get some sleep. Sunday's going to be harder than you think. He disappeared into his room, and Clara sat alone by the fire, holding his mended shirt. Her hands were trembling again, but not from fear this time. From something far more dangerous. Sunday came cold and bright. Clara wore the only dress she had that wasn't torn, a plain gray thing that hung loose on her thin frame. Ruby helped her pin up her hair, chattering about church and singing, and the cookies Mrs. Patterson always brought. Nate hitched the wagon, his movements slow and careful. His shoulder was healing, but it still pained him. Clara wanted to tell him to stay home, but she knew he wouldn't. The ride to town was quiet. Ruby sat between them, swinging her legs, humming some tuneless song. Clara's stomach twisted tighter with every mile. Silver Creek was small, just one main street, lined with wooden buildings. The church sat at the far end, white paint peeling steeple stark against the blue sky. Wagons and horses crowded the yard. People stood in clusters, talking, laughing. The laughter stopped when Nate pulled up. Clara felt every eye turned toward her. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Men stared openly. A few nodded to Nate, but their gazes slid past Clara like she was something unclean. Nate climbed down, lifted Ruby, then held out his hand to Clara. She took it, her fingers ice cold. He didn't let go as they walked toward the church. Ruby held Clara's other hand. A woman stepped forward, blocking their path. She was tall, gray-haired, dressed in black silk that was too fine for a frontier town. Mrs. Howell. Had to be. Nathaniel Cooper. Her voice was sharp. I'm surprised to see you here. Ma'am. Nate tipped his hat, his tone polite but flat. Mrs. Howell's eyes cut to Clara. And this must be the woman causing such talk. Clara lifted her chin. Clara May Harrison. I know who you are. A mail-order bride abandoned at the station, living under Mr. Cooper's roof with no chaperone, no marriage, no... She's my employee. Nate said, his voice hard. Nothing more. That's not what people are saying. Then people need to mind their own business. Mrs. Howell's face flushed. This is a Christian community. We have standards. And Clara meets him. Nate took a step forward, still holding Clara's hand. She works hard. She's kind to Ruby. She saved my life 2 nights ago when I would have bled out in that storm. If that ain't Christian, I don't know what is. The crowd had gone silent. Everyone was listening now. Mrs. Howell opened her mouth, then closed it. She stepped aside. Nate led Clara into the church. Heads turned. Whispers hissed like snakes. But Nate walked straight to the third pew, the one his family had sat in for 30 years, and he sat down. Clara sat beside him. Ruby climbed into her lap. Reverend Pritchard stood at the pulpit, a thin man with kind eyes. He looked at Clara for a long moment, then smiled. "Let us pray," he said. The service was endless. Clara didn't hear a word of it. She felt every stare, every whisper. Her hands were clenched so tight in her lap that her nails bit into her palms. When it was finally over, Nate stood and offered his hand again. Clara took it, and they walked out together. Ruby skipped ahead, her new ribbons fluttering. Outside, people parted like a river around a stone. No one spoke to them. No one except Maggie Wilson, who clapped Clara on the shoulder and said, "Well done, girl," and Reverend Pritchard, who shook Clara's hand and said, "Welcome to Silver Creek, Miss Harrison. I hope you'll stay." "Thank you," Clara whispered. On the ride home, Ruby fell asleep against Clara's side. Nate drove in silence. Finally, Clara spoke. "That was worse than I thought it would be." "It'll get better." "Will it?" Nate glanced at her. "Yeah, it will. Because you're stronger than they are, and because I'm not letting anyone run you off." Clara's throat tightened. "Why does it matter to you?" "Because Ruby needs you, and because—" He looked away, jaw tight. "Because I do too." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and terrifying. Clara didn't respond. She couldn't. She just leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes. Ruby's warm weight against her side, and let herself believe just for a moment that maybe she'd found a place where she could stay. The weeks that followed moved slow and steady as winter itself. Clara fell into a rhythm she hadn't known existed. She woke before dawn, started the fire-made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Nate would come in from checking the horse's snow, dusting his shoulders, and they'd sit across from each other at the table without speaking. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of something neither of them had words for yet. Ruby bloomed like a flower finding sun. She talked more, laughed more. She followed Clara everywhere, mimicking the way she kneaded bread, the way she hummed while she worked. At night, she'd crawl into Clara's lap with her primer, and sound out words until her eyes drooped. "You're good with her," Nate said one evening. Clara looked up from the sock she was darning. "She makes it easy." No. Emma tried for months. Ruby wouldn't speak to her, wouldn't eat. She was wasting away. He stared into his coffee. "You brought her back." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She just went back to her mending, but her hands shook slightly on the needle. Town remained hostile. When Clara went to the mercantile with Nate to buy flour and coffee, women turned their backs. The shopkeeper's wife served her with pursed lips and wouldn't meet her eyes. A group of men loitering outside went silent when she passed, then erupted in laughter the moment she was out of earshot. "Ignore them," Nate set his hand firm on the small of her back. "I'm trying." But it was Jack Morrison who made it impossible. He cornered them outside the post office on a gray afternoon. Ruby was across the street with Maggie looking at ribbons. Clara saw him coming and felt her stomach drop. "Cooper!" Jack's voice was loud, meant to carry. "Got a minute?" Nate turned slowly. "Morrison?" Jack's eyes slid to Clara, and something ugly twisted in his expression. "I hear you're keeping house for him now. Convenient." "Watch your mouth," Nate said, his voice dropping low. "I paid good money for a bride. Agency won't refund me, says the contract's fulfilled since she made it here alive." Jack stepped closer. "I'm thinking maybe I got a legal claim. I paid for her. She's mine." Clara's blood went cold. "I'm not property." "You signed a contract." That you broke when you walked away. Clara's voice shook, but she didn't back down. You called me damaged goods and left me to freeze. Any claim you had died on that platform. Jack's face flushed red. You little... Nate moved between them so fast Clara didn't see it coming. He didn't touch Jack, just stood there, broad and immovable. She's under my protection, Nate said quietly. You come near her again, we're gonna have a problem. You're harboring another man's... I'm protecting a woman you abandoned. There's a difference. Jack's jaw worked. For a moment, Clara thought he might swing. But Nate didn't move, didn't blink, and finally Jack stepped back. This ain't over. Yeah, Nate said. It is. Jack stalked away. Nate turned to Clara, his eyes searching her face. You all right? Clara nodded, but her hands were shaking. He can't really claim me, can he? No, contract's void the second he rejected you. But that don't mean he won't cause trouble. Nate's jaw tightened. Maybe you should stay at the ranch for a while. Let things settle. You mean hide. I mean stay safe. Clara looked across the street where Ruby was laughing, holding up a blue ribbon to the light. I'm tired of hiding. Something shifted in Nate's expression. I know, but sometimes it's smarter to... I ran from Pennsylvania. I hid on that train for 3 days, scared every time it stopped that he'd find me. I'm not doing it anymore. Clara met his eyes. If Jack Morrison wants to cause trouble, let him. I'm not leaving. Nate stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. But we do this my way. You don't go anywhere alone. Not town, not the barn, nowhere. Understand? I'm not a child. No. You're a woman alone in a place that ain't decided if it wants you yet. That makes you vulnerable whether you like it or not. Clara wanted to argue, but he was right. She hated that he was right. They collected Ruby and headed home. The child chattered about the ribbons, about the candy Maggie had bought her, oblivious to the tension between the adults. Clara was grateful for that. Ruby had enough fear in her young life already. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed listening to the wind rattle the shutters. Down the hall, she heard Nate moving around. His door opened. Boots creaked on the floorboards. She heard him in the main room stoking the fire. She rose, wrapped a shawl around her nightgown, and padded barefoot down the hall. Nate stood by the hearth staring into the flames. He'd pulled on pants but no shirt, and in the firelight she could see the scar on his shoulder where she'd stitched him. It had healed clean, a thin white line against tanned skin. Can't sleep? He asked without turning. No. He glanced at her, then quickly away. You should go back to bed. So should you. Can't. He poked at the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. Keep thinking about Morrison, about what he might do. Clara moved closer, the floorboards cold under her feet. You think he'll come here? I think he's the kind of man who don't like losing, even when he threw away what he lost. Nate set the poker down. I've known Jack Morrison since we were boys. He's got a mean streak. His first wife left him, took their kid, and ran off to California. He blamed her, told everyone she was faithless. But I knew her. She was a good woman, quiet, always had bruises she tried to hide. Clara's chest tightened. He hit her. Yeah. And when she finally got brave enough to leave, he made her life hell. Spread stories, turned the town against her. She couldn't even buy supplies without someone spitting at her feet. Nate turned to face Clara. I won't let that happen to you. You can't control what people think. No. But I can control what they see. And what they see is you working hard, taking care of Ruby, being respectable. He took a step closer. I can make it clear that anyone who disrespects you disrespects me. That'll just make them talk more. Let 'em talk. Talk's just noise. His voice softened. I meant what I said before. I'm not letting anyone run you off. Clara looked up at him, and something in her chest cracked open. Why do you care so much? Nate's jaw worked. He looked away, then back. Because when I pulled you off that bench, you were already half gone. I could see it in your eyes. You'd given up. And then I brought you here and you fought. You kept fighting, even when the town turned on you, even when Morrison tried to claim you. You're stronger than you know, Clara. And He stopped, shook his head. You what? I ain't good with words. Sarah used to say I had the emotional range of a fence post. He gave a bitter laugh. But I know what it feels like to be alone in a crowded room. I know what it's like to lose something and think you'll never find it again. And I know that since you came here, this place feels less empty. Clara couldn't breathe. Nate. I'm not saying it right. I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know that you matter. To Ruby. To me. You matter. The words hung between them like something fragile and precious. Clara wanted to reach for him, wanted to close the distance, but fear held her back. Fear that if she let herself want this, it would be taken away. Everything always was. I should go back to bed, she whispered. Nate nodded. He didn't move. Clara turned and walked back down the hall. She climbed into bed and pulled the quilt to her chin, but sleep wouldn't come. She lay in the dark listening to Nate move around the main room and wondered what it would be like to not be afraid anymore. 3 days later, trouble came. Clara was in the barn feeding the chickens when she heard horses, multiple horses coming fast. She dropped the feed bucket and ran to the barn door. 6 men rode into the yard, Jack Morrison at the lead. Nate stepped out of the cabin rifle in hand. Ruby appeared behind him, her face pale. Stay inside, Nate said without turning. Ruby didn't move. Jack dismounted, and the other men followed. Clara recognized 2 of them from the train station, the drunks who'd circled her that first night. Her stomach clenched. Cooper. Jack's voice was cold. We need to talk. Then talk. The town council met last night. There's been complaints about your situation here. Unmarried woman living under your roof, no chaperone. It ain't proper. That's my business, not the council's. It's the town's business when it affects our reputation. We got families here. We got standards. Jack crossed his arms. Council voted. Either you marry the girl proper or she leaves. You got 1 week to decide. Nate's grip on the rifle tightened. You got no authority to make that demand. Don't I? I'm a council member. So's Henry Phelps and Thomas Wade, all standing right here. Jack jerked his head toward the other men. We speak for the town, and the town says this situation ends. Clara stepped out of the barn. I'll leave. Every head turned. Clara, no. Nate started. I won't be the reason you lose your standing in this town. I'll go. I'll find work somewhere else. Where? Jack sneered. Who's gonna hire a used-up mail-order bride with no references? You'll end up in a crib in some mining camp flat on your back for anyone with $2. Nate moved so fast, the rifle was at Jack's throat before anyone could blink. Say another word. Nate said, his voice deadly quiet. I dare you. Jack went still. The other men shifted hands, moving toward their guns. The air crackled with violence, waiting to break. Nate, please. Clara's voice cut through the tension. It's not worth it. Yes, Nate said, not taking his eyes off Jack. It is. Ruby's voice, small and frightened, came from the cabin door. Papa, Nate, don't. Nate heard her. Clara saw it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his jaw clenched. Slowly he lowered the rifle. Jack stumbled back, his face red. You're crazy, Cooper. Maybe. But I'm also a dead shot, and you're standing on my property making threats. That gives me the right to defend what's mine. She ain't yours. Isn't she? Nate glanced at Clara, something fierce and protective burning in his eyes. She's lived here for 6 weeks. She's cared for my niece, kept my house, saved my life. Far as I'm concerned, that makes her more mine than she ever was yours. Jack's hands balled into fists. 1 week, Cooper. Marry her or send her away. If you don't, the council will force the issue. How you gonna come onto my land and drag her off? If we have to. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Finally, Jack turned and swung back onto his horse. The other men followed. They rode out without another word, but Clara could feel their eyes on her, cold and judging. When they were gone, Nate turned to her. You ain't leaving. You heard him. The council? The council can go to hell. This is my land. You're under my protection. They got no right. They'll make your life hell. They'll turn every person in this territory against you. I don't care. I do. Clara's voice broke. I won't let you sacrifice everything because of me. Then marry me. The words hit like a punch. Clara stared at him, sure she'd misheard. What? Nate set the rifle aside and moved closer. Marry me. Not because they're forcing us, because it's the only way to keep you safe. If you're my wife, they can't touch you. That's not a reason to get married. It's reason enough. No, it's not. Clara's chest ached. You don't love me. You don't even know me. I know you're brave. I know you're kind. I know Ruby loves you and I... He stopped, jaw tight. I care about you. That's enough to build on. Is it? My marriage to Sarah wasn't a love match. Not at first. Her father owed my father money, so they arranged it. We grew to care for each other over time. We were happy. Or happy enough. His voice roughened. I ain't offering you romance, Clara. I'm offering you safety. A name. A place to belong. If that's enough, then say yes. Clara couldn't speak. She wanted to say yes so badly it hurt. But she remembered her mother's marriage, the way love had twisted into violence, the way belonging had become a cage. I need to think, she whispered. Nate nodded. He looked disappointed, but not surprised. You've got a week. But Clara, whatever you decide, you ain't leaving this ranch. I'll fight every man in that town before I let them force you out. He turned and walked back into the cabin. Ruby still stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Are you leaving? The child asked. Clara knelt and pulled her close. I don't know, sweetheart. I don't know. That night, Clara sat at the table with a piece of paper and a pencil. She drew a line down the middle. On one side, she listed reasons to leave, protect Nate's reputation, avoid forced marriage, maintain independence. On the other side, reasons to stay. Ruby needs me nowhere else to go. I'm tired of running. She stared at the paper until the words blurred. Ruby crept out of her room and climbed into Clara's lap. Don't go. Ruby. Please, I'll be so good. I'll do all my letters and I won't complain about baths, and I'll eat my vegetables even when they're mushy. Just please don't go. Clara's eyes burned. It's not about you being good. Then what? It's complicated. Are you scared? Clara looked down at the child's serious face. Yes. Of Papa Nate. No. Of wanting to stay too much. Ruby frowned, thinking hard. Then she said, Mama used to say that sometimes the scariest thing is also the rightest thing. She said brave isn't not being scared. Brave is being scared and doing it anyway. Clara's throat closed. Your mama was a smart woman. She was. Ruby wrapped her arms around Clara's neck. Please be brave. Clara held her until she fell asleep, then carried her back to bed. When she returned to the table, she picked up the paper and tore it in half. The lists didn't matter. Her heart had already decided. She just had to find the courage to say it out loud. The next morning, Clara found Nate in the barn mucking out stalls. He looked up when she entered, his expression carefully neutral. I'll do it, she said. He straightened. Do what? Marry you, if the offer's still good. Something flickered across his face, too quick to name. It is. But I have conditions. His eyebrows rose. Conditions. I need my own space. My own room. I can't. She took a breath. I need time. Before anything. Physical. Nate's expression softened. Clara, I ain't expecting anything from you that you ain't ready to give. This is about keeping you safe, not, we'll figure out the rest as we go. Or not at all if that's what you want. You'd marry me and never... I'd marry you and we'd be partners. Friends if we're lucky. Anything more that's up to you. No pressure. No expectations. He set down the pitchfork and moved closer. I just need to know you'll stay. That Ruby won't lose another person she loves. Clara's eyes stung. I'll stay. Then we'll get married. This Sunday. In front of the whole town. We'll show Jack Morrison and his council that they don't get to decide our lives. What about what you want? What if you meet someone you actually love? I did love someone. She died. And I've made peace with that. Nate's voice was steady. I ain't looking for another great love, Clara. I'm just looking for someone to stand beside me and help me raise that little girl. You do that better than anyone I've ever met. That's enough for me. Is it enough for you? Clara thought about her mother, about the women in her old town who'd married for love and ended up broken. She thought about Maggie Wilson, who'd told her that respectability was overrated, but survival was everything. She thought about Ruby, who'd begged her to be brave. Yes, she said. It's enough. Nate held out his hand. Clara took it. His grip was warm, steady, and for the first time in her life, she thought maybe a promise didn't have to end in pain. I'll ride into town today, Nate said. Talk to Reverend Pritchard. We'll do it simple. Just us, and Ruby, and whoever wants to show up. The whole town will show up. They won't want to miss the spectacle. Then we'll give 'em one. His mouth quirked in something almost like a smile. You ready for that? Clara squared her shoulders. I've survived worse. Yeah, Nate said quietly. You have. Sunday came too fast. Clara wore the gray dress, again washed and mended. Maggie had brought her a posy of dried wildflowers tied with ribbon. Ruby wore her best pinafore and clutched her doll like a lifeline. The church was packed, every pew filled. Clara walked down the aisle on Nate's arm, feeling every eye, every whisper. Jack Morrison sat in the back, his face like stone. Mrs. Howell sat up front, her expression pinched and sour. Reverend Pritchard stood at the altar, his kind eyes steady on Clara. Dearly beloved, he began. Clara didn't hear most of it. Her heart hammered too loud. But she heard Nate say, I do, in that steady, certain voice. She heard herself say it back, her voice barely a whisper. You may kiss the bride. Nate looked at her, a question in his eyes. Clara nodded. He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers, brief and chaste. It was her first kiss. It didn't feel like the poem said it would. It just felt safe. When they turned to face the congregation, Ruby threw her arms around both of them. You're married, she said, her voice full of wonder. You're really married. We are, Clara said. Does that mean you're my mama now? Clara looked at Nate. He nodded. Yes, Clara whispered. If you want me to be. I do. Ruby squeezed tighter. I do. And there in that crowded church with half the town watching and judging, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like she belonged. The reception was held in the church hall, a drafty room that smelled of pine and old coffee. Someone had strung paper chains across the rafters. Mrs. Patterson laid out cookies on a long table, and Maggie Wilson poured coffee from a battered pot. People came through the line, shaking Nate's hand, nodding stiffly at Clara. Some offered genuine congratulations. Most just stared. Jack Morrison didn't come through the line at all. He stood in the corner with his arms crossed, watching. Clara felt his eyes on her like a hand around her throat. Ignore him. Nate murmured, his hand warm on her lower back. I'm trying. Ruby darted between the adults, showing off her mama to anyone who'd listen. This is my mama now. We're a real family. Her joy was so pure, it made Clara's chest ache. Mrs. Howell approached with her daughter in tow, a pale girl named Catherine, who couldn't have been more than 19. Mrs. Cooper. She said the title sharp on her tongue. I suppose congratulations are in order. Thank you, Clara said quietly. Though I must say it's quite unusual to marry so quickly. Some might call it scandalous. Some might call it none of their business, Maggie said, appearing at Clara's elbow with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Clara and sipped the other, her eyes hard on Mrs. Howell. Mrs. Howell's lips thinned. I'm simply concerned for the moral fabric of our community. The moral fabric's just fine, Maggie said. What you're concerned about is control. You don't like that Nate made a choice without asking your permission first. I never. Yes, you did. You always do. Maggie turned to Clara. Don't let her get under your skin. She tried the same thing with me when I opened the boarding house. Said it wasn't proper for a woman to run a business. I told her where she could shove her propriety. Clara choked on her coffee. Mrs. Howell made a strangled noise and swept away Catherine, trailing behind her like a ghost. You shouldn't antagonize her, Clara said. Why not? Someone needs to. Maggie clinked her cup against Clara's. Welcome to the family, Mrs. Cooper. You're gonna need a thick skin and a sense of humor. Might as well start practicing now. The celebration didn't last long. By mid-afternoon, people started drifting away. Nate loaded Ruby into the wagon, then helped Clara up. She was exhausted, wrung out from smiling at people who didn't like her, from pretending she wasn't terrified of what came next. The ride home was quiet. Ruby fell asleep with her head on Clara's lap, clutching her doll. Nate drove with steady hands, his eyes on the horizon. The winter sun was already sinking, painting the snow gold and pink. You did good today, he said finally. I didn't do anything. You stood there and let him judge you without flinching. That takes courage. Clara looked down at Ruby's sleeping face. I did it for her. I know. Nate glanced at her. But you can do it for yourself, too. You earned the right to be there. You earned the right to this name. Clara's throat tightened. She didn't feel like she'd earned anything. She felt like a fraud wearing borrowed clothes, playing house in someone else's life. When they got home, Nate carried Ruby to bed while Clara started supper. Her hands moved automatically, slicing potatoes, stirring beans. She heard Nate's boots in the hallway, heard him moving around in his room. The cabin felt different now, smaller, like the walls were pressing in. Clara. Nate stood in the doorway to the main room. He'd changed out of his good shirt into his work clothes. We should talk. Her stomach dropped. All right. He sat at the table and gestured for her to join him. She did, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl waiting for punishment. I meant what I said before, Nate began. About not expecting anything from you. That still stands. You keep your room, I keep mine. We're married on paper, but the rest, we'll figure it out as we go. What if we never figure it out? He looked at her for a long moment. Then we don't. We just keep going the way we have been. Partners, friends. That's more than a lot of married folks have. Don't you want more? What I want don't matter. What matters is you feel safe here. Do you? Clara thought about it. About the way Nate had stood between her and Jack Morrison, the way he'd given her his coat that first night, the way he'd never once pushed her for anything she wasn't ready to give. Yes, she said, I do. Then that's enough. He stood, then hesitated. There's something else. Ruby's father sent word. He wants to see her. Clara's blood went cold. When? He didn't say. Just that he'd be coming through in the spring. Nate's jaw was tight. I won't let him take her. I don't care what legal right he thinks he has. She's mine now. Ours. What if he fights? Then I'll fight back. But I wanted you to know. In case... He trailed off. In case what? In case you want to leave before things get complicated. Clara stood, moved closer to him. I'm not leaving. I promised Ruby. I promised you. I keep my promises. Something shifted in Nate's expression, something warm and grateful. Thank you. That night, Clara lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. She was married. She had a daughter. She had a home. Everything she'd wanted when she stepped on that train 6 weeks ago. So why did she feel like she was waiting for it all to be taken away? The answer came in the dark hours before dawn. Because everything always was. Winter deepened. The snow piled higher, burying fences drifting against the cabin walls. Nate and Clara fell into an easy routine. She cooked and cleaned, and taught Ruby her letters. He chopped wood and tended the horses, and fixed everything that broke. They moved around each other like dancers who'd practiced the steps 1,000 times. But something was building between them, something unspoken and heavy. Clara felt it in the way Nate's hand lingered when he passed her the coffee pot, in the way his eyes followed her across the room. She felt it in her own chest, a tightness that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with want. She didn't know what to do with that feeling, so she ignored it. Ruby, on the other hand, was thriving. She talked constantly now, asking questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Where do snowflakes come from? Can we get a puppy? She started calling Clara Mama without hesitation, and every time she did, Clara felt like her heart would crack open. "You're good for her," Maggie said one afternoon. She'd ridden out to deliver supplies and stayed for coffee. "I ain't seen that child smile this much since before Emma died." "She's easy to love," Clara said. "So are you." Maggie gave her a knowing look. "Nate thinks so too." Clara's cheeks burned. "He's just being kind." "Nate Cooper ain't kind. He's fair, he's decent, but he ain't kind. Not unless he cares about someone." Maggie leaned forward. "He looks at you the way a man looks at water when he's been thirsty too long." "You're imagining things." When's the last time that man smiled before you showed up? When's the last time he laughed?" Maggie shook her head. "You brought him back to life, Clara, whether you meant to or not." Clara didn't know what to say to that. She changed the subject, asked about town, about the weather, about anything else. But Maggie's words stayed with her long after the woman rode away. That night, after Ruby was in bed, Clara sat by the fire mending one of Nate's shirts. He sat across from her cleaning his rifle, the smell of gun oil sharp in the air. The silence stretched comfortable and warm. "Can I ask you something?" Nate said suddenly. Clara looked up. "Of course." "Why'd you really leave Pennsylvania? Not the easy version. The truth." Clara's hands stilled on the fabric. She'd known this question would come eventually. She just hadn't expected it tonight. "My stepfather was a drunk," she said quietly. "Mean, when he was sober, worse when he wasn't. He'd hit my mother for years. I tried to stop him once when I was 16. He broke my arm." She swallowed hard. "After that, I learned to stay out of his way, until the night he came after me instead." Nate's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "I was sleeping. He came into my room and—" Clara stopped her throat closing. "I fought him off. Grabbed the fire poker and hit him hard enough to break his nose. He said he'd have me arrested for assault. Said no one would believe me, that everyone knew I was trouble. So I took the money I'd been saving and I ran." "How old were you?" 20, 2 years ago. Nate set down the rifle. "Where'd you go?" "Philadelphia first. Worked in a factory for a year. Then I saw an advertisement for mail-order brides. It seemed like a way out. A way to start over where no one knew me." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out running don't solve anything. You just end up alone in a different place." "You ain't alone anymore." Clara looked at him. His eyes were steady, sincere. "No, I'm not." "Did he ever come after you?" "I don't know. I never went back to find out." Clara folded the shirt carefully. "I used to have nightmares about it, about him finding me, dragging me back. If he shows up here, he'll have to go through me first." The words were simple matter of fact, but they hit Clara like a punch. No one had ever offered to stand between her and her nightmares before. "Thank you," she whispered. Nate nodded and went back to cleaning his rifle. But something had shifted between them, some wall had come down. Clara felt it in the air, warm and electric. 2 weeks later, the letter came. Nate rode into town to pick up supplies and returned with his face like stone. He handed Clara an envelope, official-looking, with a lawyer's return address. "What is this?" "Read it." Clara's hands shook as she unfolded the paper. The words blurred, then sharpened. Thomas Hartley, Ruby's father, was filing for custody. He claimed Nate was unfit, that an unmarried man couldn't properly care for a young girl. The hearing was set for early March. "But you're married now," Clara said. "Letters dated 3 weeks ago, before the wedding." Nate took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair. He probably thought that would be enough to get her back. Now he'll argue the marriage was a sham, that we only did it to keep Ruby. Which is true. Doesn't matter. We're married legal. We got a preacher and witnesses. That counts for something. Clara reread the letter. It says he remarried. To a woman named Helen. They have a proper home in Cheyenne, a stable income. He's saying Ruby deserves a real family. She has a real family. Us. Nate's voice was hard. I'm not giving her up, Clara. I'll fight this with everything I got. Even if you lose, I won't lose. But Clara heard the fear underneath the certainty. She'd heard that same fear in her own voice 2 years ago, when she'd told herself her stepfather would never find her. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She paced her small room until she couldn't stand it anymore, then crept into the main room. Nate sat by the fire, staring into the flames. He looked up when she entered. Can't sleep either. She shook her head. I keep thinking about Ruby. About what happens if we lose. We won't. But if we do, we won't. Nate's voice was fierce. That man abandoned her. Left her to grieve alone because he couldn't stand to look at her. Now he wants her back, because his new wife needs a built-in maid. Not happening. Clara sat beside him. What if the judge doesn't see it that way? Then we'll run. Take Ruby and disappear. Go to California or Oregon or Mexico. Somewhere he can't find us. You'd give up everything, the ranch, your life here. For her. Yeah, I would. He looked at Clara. Would you? Clara thought about it. About the cabin that had become home, about the town that was slowly, grudgingly accepting her. About the man sitting beside her, who'd become more than just her husband on paper. Yes, she said. I would. Nate reached out and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her like this, deliberately, intimately. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. We'll figure it out, he said. Together. Clara nodded. She didn't pull her hand away. They sat like that until dawn, watching the fire burn down to embers, holding on to each other like lifelines. The next few weeks were tense. Nate hired a lawyer, a sharp-eyed man from Laramie, who said they had a decent case, but no guarantees. Ruby knew something was wrong. She grew quiet again, clingy. She'd wake crying from nightmares and wouldn't go back to sleep unless Clara sat with her. I don't want to leave, Ruby said one night, her voice small in the dark. I don't want to go with him. You won't, Clara promised, even though she couldn't be sure. We won't let that happen. But what if the judge makes me? Clara held her tighter. Then we'll fight. And if we can't win, we'll run. All three of us. We're a family now. Families stick together. Ruby's arms tightened around her neck. Forever. Forever. The hearing was set for the first week of March. As the date approached, Nate grew quieter, more tense. He worked longer hours, pushing himself until he was exhausted. Clara knew what he was doing. He was trying to outrun the fear. She knew because she was doing the same thing. 3 days before they were supposed to leave for Cheyenne, Jack Morrison showed up again. Clara was alone in the cabin making bread. Ruby was at Maggie's for the afternoon, and Nate was out checking the fence line. She heard the horse looked out the window and felt her stomach drop. Jack tied his horse to the porch rail and knocked. Clara thought about not answering, but that would only make things worse. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door. Mrs. Cooper. Jack's smile was cold. Can I come in? My husband isn't here. I know. I waited until I saw him ride out. Jack pushed past her into the cabin. We need to talk. Clara's heart hammered. About what? About the fact that you're married to a man who's about to lose everything. Jack turned to face her. I heard about the custody hearing. Thomas Hartley's a friend of mine. He told me what he's going to say on the stand, about how Nate's unfit, how this marriage is a fraud. You think the judge won't see through it? You think he won't strip that little girl away and leave you with nothing? Get out. I'm here to make you an offer. Jack stepped closer. Leave him. Come with me. I'll tell the judge I was wrong about you, that we should have married like we planned. I'll say Nate coerced you, that you were scared. The judge will believe me. Nate'll lose Ruby, but you'll be safe. Clara stared at him. You think I'd betray my husband and daughter for you? I think you're smart enough to know when you're on a sinking ship. Jack's voice hardened. You came here with nothing. You leave with nothing. Or you leave with me, and at least you got a future. Your choice. I already made my choice. Now get out of my house. Jack's expression turned ugly. You think Nate loves you? He married you because he needed a nanny. That's all you are, a servant with a ring. The second Ruby's gone, he won't need you anymore. The words hit like a slap, but Clara didn't flinch. You don't know him. I know men like him. Honorable men who keep their promises even when they regret them. He'll keep you around out of duty, but he'll never love you. Not like I could. You don't love me either. You just want to win. Jack grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. I'm trying to help you. Let go of me. Not until you listen. The door slammed open. Nate stood in the doorway, his rifle leveled at Jack's chest. Take your hands off my wife. Jack dropped Clara's arm and stepped back, his face pale. I was just... Get out. Nate, I was offering her a way out. I said get out. You got 3 seconds before I pull this trigger. Jack held up his hands and backed toward the door. This ain't over. Yeah, Nate said quietly. It is. You come near my wife or my daughter again, I'll kill you. That clear enough? Jack's face flushed red, but he didn't argue. He pushed past Nate and mounted his horse, riding off at a gallop. Nate lowered the rifle and turned to Clara. Are you hurt? No. But her hands were shaking. Nate crossed to her, set the rifle aside, and gently touched her arm where Jack had grabbed her. Bruises were already forming. His jaw tightened. I should have shot him. I'm glad you didn't. He threatened you. He was desperate and stupid. Clara looked up at him. He said you don't love me. That you only married me because you needed a nanny. Nate's expression went carefully blank. Is that what you think? I don't know what to think. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Jack Morrison don't know a damn thing about what I feel. Neither does anyone else in this town. They see what they want to see. But you should know better. What does that mean? It means I don't do things halfway. When I made you my wife, I meant it. Not just on paper. I meant it here. He pressed his hand over his heart. Maybe it started as convenience, but it ain't that anymore. Hasn't been for a while. Clara's breath caught. Nate, I ain't expecting you to say it back. I know you got reasons to be careful to hold back, but I need you to know that when I stand in that courtroom and tell the judge you're my wife, I ain't lying. You are, in every way that matters. Tears burned Clara's eyes. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to let someone care about me without waiting for it to turn into something ugly. Then we'll learn together. He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear. I ain't him, Clara. I ain't your stepfather or Jack Morrison or anyone else who hurt you. I'm just a man trying his best not to mess this up. Clara closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. I'm scared. So am I. His voice was rough. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe alone. She opened her eyes and found him watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. Slowly giving her time to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. Not the brief chaste kiss from their wedding, but something real. Something that tasted like promise and hope, and the beginning of something neither of them had words for yet. When he pulled back, Clara was trembling. Not from fear, from something else entirely. We're gonna be okay, Nate said. All three of us. I promise you that. Clara wanted to believe him. And for the first time in her life, she thought maybe she could. The courthouse in Cheyenne was a brick building that smelled like old paper and fear. Clara sat on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, her hands folded tight in her lap. Ruby sat beside her, small and silent, clutching her doll. Nate stood by the window, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on something outside that Clara couldn't see. Their lawyer, Mr. Brennan, paced the hallway, his boots clicking against the floor. "Remember what I told you. Answer the questions directly. Don't volunteer information. And whatever you do, don't lose your temper." Nate nodded without turning around. The door opened and a clerk appeared. "The judge is ready." Clara's stomach dropped. She stood, her legs shaky. Ruby grabbed her hand, holding tight. "It's gonna be okay, Mama," Ruby whispered. Clara wished she believed it. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected. Judge Morrison, no relation to Jack, sat behind a high desk, his face weathered and stern. Thomas Hartley sat at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, a polished man in an expensive suit. Beside Thomas sat a woman Clara assumed was Helen, his new wife. She was pretty young, with nervous hands that twisted a handkerchief. Nate, Clara, and Mr. Brennan took their seats at the defense table. Ruby sat between them, her doll pressed to her chest. Judge Morrison banged his gavel. "Let's begin. Mr. Hartley, you're petitioning for custody of your daughter, Ruby Louise Hartley. State your case." Thomas's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client is Ruby's biological father. He has remarried and established a stable home in Cheyenne. He's seeking to reclaim his daughter from an arrangement that was never meant to be permanent. Mr. Cooper was granted temporary guardianship, is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor. Temporary. After the death of Mr. Hartley's first wife, he was grieving and felt unable to care for a young child. He made the difficult decision to leave Ruby with her uncle. But that was never intended to be forever." The judge looked at Thomas. "Is that accurate, Mr. Hartley?" Thomas stood. He was a thin man with pale eyes and a weak chin. "Yes, sir. I was devastated after Emma died. I couldn't think straight. I thought Ruby would be better off with Nate for a while. But now I'm remarried, I've got a good job at the railroad, and I want my daughter back." "Why the change of heart?" Thomas glanced at Helen. "My wife and I, we want a family. Ruby deserves to grow up with two parents who can provide for her properly. And you don't believe Mr. Cooper can provide for her?" "Not like we can. He's a bachelor living alone on an isolated ranch." Thomas's lawyer cleared his throat, and Thomas corrected himself. "Well, he was a bachelor until recently. He married some woman he barely knew just to keep Ruby. That ain't a real marriage. That's desperation." Nate's hand clenched on the table. Clara touched his arm gently, a silent reminder to stay calm. Judge Morrison turned to Mr. Brennan. "Your response." Mr. Brennan stood. "Your Honor, Mr. Cooper has cared for Ruby for over a year. He's provided her with a stable home, an education, and most importantly, love. Ruby has thrived under his care. As for his marriage, it's legal and legitimate. The timing may have been prompted by this custody battle, but that doesn't make it any less real. Let's hear from Mr. Cooper himself." The judge looked at Nate. "Why should Ruby remain in your custody?" Nate stood slowly. Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands hung stiff at his sides. "Because she's mine," Nate said quietly. "Not by blood, but by choice. When Thomas left her with me, she was broken. She wouldn't talk, wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. She had nightmares every night. And I stayed up with her. I held her when she cried. I taught her it was okay to be sad, that grief don't make you weak. It took months before she smiled again, before she felt safe enough to be a child. And you believe you can continue to provide that stability. I know I can. With my wife's help, Ruby's doing better than she ever has. She's reading, she's laughing, she's happy. You take her away from that, you'll break her all over again." The judge made a note. "I'd like to speak with Ruby." Clara's chest tightened. Ruby's hand gripped hers harder. "Ruby, can you come up here, please?" Ruby looked at Clara with terrified eyes. Clara nodded, trying to look brave, even though her heart was breaking. Ruby stood and walked to the judge's desk, her doll dragging on the floor. Judge Morrison's expression softened. "Hello, Ruby. Do you know why you're here today?" Ruby nodded. "Your father wants you to come live with him and his new wife. Do you understand that?" Another nod. "How do you feel about that?" Ruby was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't want to go." Thomas stood up. "Ruby, honey, I'm your father." "Sit down, Mr. Hartley," the judge said sharply. He turned back to Ruby. "Why don't you want to go?" "Because he left me." Ruby's voice was small but steady. "When Mama died, he said I reminded him too much of her. He said he couldn't look at me, so he gave me to Uncle Nate, and he never came back. He's come back now. Only because his new wife wants a daughter. I heard him tell his lawyer that. He said Helen wanted to play house, and Ruby was convenient." Ruby's eyes filled with tears. "I'm not convenient. I'm a person." Clara pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from sobbing. Judge Morrison leaned forward. "Who takes care of you now, Ruby?" "Uncle Nate and Mama Clara." "Your mama passed away, sweetheart." "Not that mama, my new mama. She married Uncle Nate, and now she's mine." Ruby turned and pointed at Clara. "She reads to me and teaches me letters and braids my hair. She stayed up all night when I was sick. She sings me songs when I have bad dreams. She's my mama now." The judge looked at Clara for a long moment. "Mrs. Cooper, would you come forward, please?" Clara stood on shaking legs and moved to stand beside Ruby. The child immediately grabbed her hand. "How long have you known Ruby?" "3 months, Your Honor." "And you married Mr. Cooper when?" 6 weeks ago." "That's not much time to build a family." "No, sir, it's not." Clara's voice was steadier than she felt. "But time doesn't always matter. Love does. And I love this child like she came from my own body. I'd do anything to protect her, including standing here and fighting for her when her own father couldn't be bothered until it was convenient." "That's a strong accusation." "It's the truth. Thomas Hartley abandoned his daughter when she needed him most. Now he wants her back because it looks good, because his new wife needs a project. But Ruby's not a project. She's a little girl who's been hurt enough. She deserves to stay where she's loved, where she's safe." Judge Morrison studied Clara's face, then Ruby's, then looked across the courtroom at Thomas and Helen. The room was silent except for the scratch of the clerk's pen. "I'd like to take a short recess," the judge said finally. "I'll render my decision in 30 minutes. The gavel came down like a gunshot. They waited in the hallway. Ruby sat in Clara's lap, trembling. Nate stood with his back against the wall, his eyes closed. Mr. Brennan tried to make small talk, but no one responded. Thomas and Helen emerged from the courtroom. Thomas wouldn't meet Nate's eyes, but Helen did. She looked at Ruby, then at Clara, and something passed across her face. Regret, maybe. Or shame. "Thomas," Helen said quietly, "can we talk?" "Not now." "Yes, now." Helen pulled him aside out of earshot. They spoke in urgent whispers. Thomas's face got red, his hands gesturing sharply. Helen just shook her head over and over. Finally, Thomas stormed back into the courtroom. Helen stayed in the hallway. She approached Clara slowly. "I'm sorry," Helen said. Clara blinked. "What?" "I didn't know. About why he left her. He told me his brother-in-law took her because Thomas worked long hours. He said it was temporary, that you were taking advantage." Helen's voice cracked. "I pushed him to get her back because I wanted to be a mother. But not like this. Not by ripping her away from people who actually love her." "Then why are you here?" "Because I'm a fool who believed the wrong man." Helen looked at Ruby. "She's happy with you. I can see that. And I won't be part of taking that away." The clerk appeared. "Judge is ready." They filed back into the courtroom. The judge sat behind his desk, a paper in front of him. His expression gave nothing away. "I've reviewed the facts of this case and considered the testimony of all parties involved. This is not an easy decision. Mr. Hartley, you are Ruby's biological father, and under normal circumstances, that would carry significant weight. However, these are not normal circumstances." Thomas's lawyer started to object, but the judge held up a hand. "You abandoned your daughter during the most vulnerable time of her life. You left her to grieve alone because you couldn't handle your own pain. Mr. Cooper stepped in and provided her with stability, love, and a home. He did what you should have done." "Your Honor, my client was grieving." "We all grieve, Counselor. It doesn't give us the right to abandon our responsibilities." The judge looked at Ruby. This child has made her wishes clear. She wants to stay with her uncle and his wife, and after hearing the testimony today, I see no reason to deny her that. Clara's breath caught. Nate's hand found hers under the table. Custody of Ruby Louise Hartley will remain with Nathaniel Cooper and his wife Clara May Cooper. This is a permanent arrangement. Mr. Hartley, you may petition for visitation rights if you wish, but custody is no longer in question. The gavel came down. Ruby burst into tears and threw her arms around Clara. Nate pulled them both close, his face pressed into Clara's hair. She felt his shoulders shake and realized he was crying too. Across the courtroom, Thomas sat with his head in his hands. Helen stood and walked out without looking back. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining. The snow was melting, running in rivulets down the street. Spring was coming, Clara realized. Winter was finally over. Ruby ran ahead, spinning in circles, laughing. "We won. We won." Nate caught Clara's hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For fighting for her. For us." He stopped, turned to face her. "I meant what I said in there. You're her mother now. Not because a judge said so, but because you chose her. You chose us." Clara looked up at him, this man who'd saved her life in more ways than one. "You chose me first. Best decision I ever made." He kissed her right there on the courthouse steps, and Clara kissed him back. It wasn't their first kiss, but it was different. It was a promise. A beginning. They stayed in Cheyenne that night at a small hotel. Ruby fell asleep between them, her face peaceful for the first time in weeks. Clara lay awake, listening to her breathe, feeling Nate's warmth on her other side. "You still awake?" Nate whispered. "Yeah." "What are you thinking about?" "That I'm happy, and I'm not used to that." Nate propped himself up on one elbow, careful not to wake Ruby. "Get used to it, because I plan on making you happy for a long time." Clara smiled in the dark. "Is that a promise?" "It's a guarantee." The ride home took 2 days. They stopped at Maggie's first, and the woman nearly crushed them all in a hug when she heard the news. She baked a cake, opened a bottle of wine she'd been saving, and toasted to family, the kind you choose and the kind that chooses you back. When they finally reached the ranch, Clara stood on the porch and looked out at the land stretching white and endless under the stars. The cabin glowed warm behind her smoke, curling from the chimney. Inside, Nate was getting Ruby ready for bed, their voices drifting through the door, easy and familiar. This was hers now. Not borrowed, not temporary. Hers. The weeks that followed were the happiest Clara had ever known. The snow melted, revealing green underneath. Wildflowers pushed through the mud. The horses ran in the pasture, their winter coats shedding. Ruby planted a garden, her small hands covered in dirt, chattering about tomatoes and carrots and sunflowers as tall as the house. Clara and Nate grew closer, the careful distance between them shrinking. He started joining her by the fire at night, reading while she mended, their shoulders touching. She started kissing him goodbye when he left for town and hello when he came home. Small touches became longer ones. Separate rooms became a discussion they both knew was coming, but neither rushed. One evening after Ruby was asleep, Clara found Nate on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Can I join you?" "Always." She sat beside him, and he pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the wind in the grass, the distant call of a meadowlark. "I need to tell you something," Clara said finally. Nate looked down at her. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. That's what scares me." She took a breath. "I'm not used to things being right. I keep waiting for it to fall apart." "It won't." "How do you know?" "Because we won't let it." He cupped her face gently. "Clara, I can't promise you that life won't be hard sometimes. I can't promise we won't fight or struggle or face things that scare us. But I can promise you that I'll be here. Every day, every night, for as long as you'll have me. I'll be here." Clara's eyes burned. "I love you." The words came out without permission, raw and true. Nate went still. "Say that again." "I love you." Clara laughed through tears. "I didn't mean to. I tried not to. But I do. I love you." Nate kissed her deep and fierce and full of everything he couldn't say. When he pulled back, his voice was rough. "I love you too. Have for weeks. Maybe since the day you stitched me up and told me to stop being stubborn. Maybe before that." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I was waiting for you. I knew you needed time to trust this. To trust me. I would have waited forever if that's what it took." Clara kissed him again, and this time she didn't hold back. She poured everything into it, all the fear and hope and love she'd been too scared to name. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Nate rested his forehead against hers. "Come to bed with me," he said quietly. "Not because you have to, because you want to." Clara's heart hammered. "I want to." He stood and held out his hand. She took it, and he led her inside down the hallway past Ruby's room, where the child slept peacefully, to his room. Their room now. The door closed softly behind them, and for the first time in her life, Clara wasn't afraid of what came next. Morning came soft and warm. Clara woke wrapped in Nate's arms, his heartbeat steady under her ear. She felt different, lighter, like something that had been locked tight inside her had finally opened. "Morning," Nate murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning." He kissed the top of her head. "You okay?" "Better than okay." They lay there until they heard Ruby stirring, then rose and dressed, grinning at each other like children with a secret. At breakfast, Ruby looked between them and smiled. "You're different today." "How so?" Clara asked. "Happier. Both of you." Ruby spread jam on her toast. "I like it." Clara met Nate's eyes across the table. He smiled, and she smiled back, and it was enough. The town eventually came around. Mrs. Howell never did, but her opinion mattered less and less. Other women started speaking to Clara at church, inviting her to quilting circles and barn raisings. She made friends slowly, carefully, but she made them. Jack Morrison left town that summer. Rumor said he'd gone to California. No one missed him. Ruby thrived. She grew taller, braver, louder. She still had nightmares, sometimes still missed her mother. But she had Clara now, and Nate, and that was enough. More than enough. 2 years later, on a spring morning, when the wildflowers were blooming and the air smelled like rain, Clara gave birth to a daughter. They named her Emma after Ruby's mother, and Ruby held her sister with gentle hands and fierce love. "She's ours," Ruby said, wonder in her voice. "Really ours." "Really ours," Clara agreed. Nate stood behind them, his hand on Clara's shoulder, watching his family with eyes that held everything he'd never been able to say out loud. But he didn't need words. Clara understood anyway. 5 years after that, on a cold November evening, Clara stood on the porch and watched Ruby ride toward town with her friends, laughing, confident, whole. Emma played in the yard with the puppy they'd finally gotten, her blonde curls bouncing. Inside, Nate was making dinner, and the cabin smelled like home. Clara thought back to that girl who'd sat freezing on a train platform, terrified and alone, sure she'd die before morning. She'd been so certain that hope was a lie, that happiness was something other people got. She'd been wrong. "Mama," Emma called. "Come see what Daisy can do." Clara smiled and walked toward her daughter, toward the noise and mess and beautiful chaos of the life she'd built. Behind her, Nate appeared in the doorway, watching them with that quiet smile she'd come to know so well. "You coming in soon?" he called. "In a minute." But she stayed outside a little longer, soaking in the evening light, the sound of her children's laughter, the solid warmth of knowing she was home. Really, truly home. And for the first time in her life, Clara believed it would last. Not because life had suddenly become easy, but because she'd learned something that terrified girl on the platform hadn't known yet, that love wasn't something that happened to you. It was something you built day by day, choice by choice, with someone who showed up even when things got hard. She'd found that someone. She'd found this life. And she was never letting go. Inside the cabin, Nate called her name again, laughter in his voice, and Clara turned toward it like a flower turning toward the sun, her heart full, her fear finally beautifully gone. This was hers. All of it. And nothing, not the past or the future, or anything in between, could take it away. Not anymore. Not ever again.